In the last lesson, we showed you how you can create a navigation bar fully styled using the Bootstrap classes. Now, whenever we collapse it, we're still missing a way to open up and uncollapse this navigation bar, which we would typically expect on the smaller screens. And Bootstrap gives you full control to take care of this, and it's got a lot of great options for this. So typically, we might use a button element in order to do this, and again, the magic really happens within the classes. So everything with Bootstrap is related to these classes, and this is where Bootstrap picks up the information that it needs in order to make all of these actions happen. So this class is called Navbar toggler. So that means that it's a toggler for the toggleable class down here just below. And we are going to hook these together. I'm going to show you how. So again, we've got that option to hide it. So we can do hidden, and we're going to hide it on SM up. So if we don't hide it, it's going to be always visible. And this is again new with Bootstrap 4, where we've got the ability to set that breakpoint whenever we want this navigation bar to show up. So let's do button. So we need to specify that this is a type button. We've got also some attributes here. So these are Bootstrap attributes that you need to include for your toggle button to be able to work. So the first one is that it's a data toggle collapse, so that Bootstrap understands, or the web browser can understand and relate that this is the action that we want to take with this button whenever it gets clicked. So it's going to pick up all of these attributes and information accordingly when we've got these classes in place. So data target is another super important one, and this is where we need to specify that we're targeting to nav tog. So whatever we had given this ID, make sure that we're setting it up as that to be the target. And then let's shut this down, and we'll take a look at it within the browser. So when I refresh it, so I get my navigation toggle bar there, and whenever it shrinks down. So notice that it's not quite working yet, so we still have to finish that hookup, but essentially we've got our button showing up whenever we shrink down to the size of the screen. Whenever we enlarge it, then we get all of these items showing back up. So let's update the one mistake that's left here. And if this is important to note that when you are specifying a data target, it doesn't actually know what target this is. So it doesn't know if this is an ID or a class or a tag. So we need to specify it just as we would with CSS, where we include that hash. And this is something that is going to be used over and over within Bootstrap. And a lot of times people leave these out, so it is important to include that hash in order for Bootstrap to be able to identify this as a button. So now when we click it, everything's working and working properly. So I did want to highlight that we need to make sure the data target relates to the element that we have here, and in this case we're using ID to identify it, so make sure that everything hooks up properly. So just as a quick overview, what we've done here, this is essentially the nav element, the navbar element. So in order to use a navbar, we need to specify that this is a navbar. This stuff over here, this is just for coloring. So even if I was to remove that, we still get all of the same functionality, but of course we can't see our button there because we haven't specified any colors. So this is something to keep in mind, and we don't have to include this background color. So we can do something where we can set a color, we can set it up in our CSS and create our own color, or we can add an inline style, and we could do something like background color and do something like red. So we can pick now with Bootstrap we've got a lot more options for the background colors. So if you want red, there you go, that's how you do red. And if you pick a color that is a light color, then make sure that you're specifying that the navbar dash light is the color of the font. So this just specifies the color of the font, and then the other one we're specifying the background. The stuff over here, so this button is linking to this element over here, and what we're doing is make sure that you include these two attributes. The first one indicates what this button class is all about. It's a collapse button, and where our target of this collapse. So linking it over to this ID. Over here, we're specifying that this is a navbar toggler, and we don't have to hide it going up, but it's always a good idea because then it just doesn't look right if we don't hide it. So that's the reasoning for hiding it. And usually when you're hiding it, you keep it in line with this toggleable. So if I was to change this to MD, we could change this to SM, and now our breaking points would be different. So whenever we shrink it down, so we're not quite as small when we're shrinking it down. And then of course you have to adjust these accordingly as well, because we're still floating SM right. So then this one would have to be changed to MD, so it's in line with that. Going back over here, refreshing it, and now we see everything is aligned properly again. So with Bootstrap 4, they gave us more control with the breaking points, but it's also quite a bit more here with getting everything to work in line. So a lot of times it's just some small adjustments that you need to do. Then over here with the unordered list, this is where we have our actual links within the navbar. So we've got nav, and we saw how without the navbar nav that they're not floating over to the right hand, or they're not in line. So we need to include that to make sure that it's a horizontal navigation bar, and then we also float it over to the right. So we saw that we can position it to where we want it to be. Make sure that our list items include nav item, and of course we need to include the nav link in order for Bootstrap to be able to understand that this is the styling that it's expecting, that every one of these list items, if it has a link, it should be indicated that these are the links. So now that we've gotten one of the more complex parts of the website set up and running, now the rest of it is just designing it the way that we want. So next lesson, we're going to design some of the website content. So again, depending on what you want to do with your website, if you want to have how many columns you want to have in your website, and so on. This is so easy to do with Bootstrap using the grid setup. So we're going to be taking you through that in the upcoming lesson.